Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something that's been a question for as long as people have been thinking about this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Nature versus nurture, right? Like how much of who we are and what we can do comes from like our genes, you know, the stuff we're born with, versus what we learn and experience.
Yeah, so it's an age-old question.
Totally. And for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at this really cool philosophical discussion between four friends. They're just hanging out in the garden, just like shooting the breeze and kind of going back and forth about nature versus nurture.
Sounds relaxing.
Yeah, totally. And the coolest thing about this one is that it actually like asks you questions directly throughout the text, like you're part of the conversation.
Oh, wow. So it's interactive.
Yeah, totally. Like it really makes you stop and think about like, okay, what do I believe about this? You know?
I like that.
Yeah. And it gets into some really interesting stuff. Like, do our genes like set a limit on what we can achieve? Or can we like totally transcend those limitations? What's the best way to approach self-improvement?
Okay. Yeah. All good questions.
All the big questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, it drops us right into the scene, right? You can just imagine like a peaceful garden, sunlight filtering through the leaves.
Yeah.
You know, birds chirping.
Right.
These four friends, Xiao Jin, Veronica, Isaac, and Adler, they're just relaxing. And Xiao Jin kind of kicks off the conversation by posing the central question, right? Like, should we lean more on our inborn nature? Or should we really prioritize developing our skills and knowledge through nurture?
And what do they think about that?
Well, each of them brings a totally different perspective to the table.
Oh, cool.
So it's not like you get a simple answer. It's more like they're all bouncing ideas off of each other and kind of challenging each other's assumptions.
Okay.
Which I think is how these conversations should go.
Yeah.
One of the first things that Xiao Jin talks about is the story of a master sculptor from like ancient times. And the sculptor, he had this crazy natural talent. Like he could just feel the stone.
Wow.
And he was so sensitive to it, but he didn't just rely on that. You know what I mean?
Right.
He spent decades honing his craft.
Right.
Practicing, pushing his boundaries, like always trying to get better.
So he was like taking that natural talent and then multiplying it through effort.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if you only ever relied on your natural abilities.
Yeah.
How far would you really get?
Right. You'd probably plateau pretty quick.
Exactly. The sculptor, he recognized that nature gave him a head start, but it was nurture that allowed him to achieve mastery.
It's like talent is the raw material.
Okay. Yeah.
But effort is the chisel that shapes it.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
So like in your field, you might have a natural knack for, let's say, podcasting.
Sure.
But to become like a truly amazing host.
Yeah.
It takes practice, right?
Yeah.
It takes dedication. Definitely. Always learning, trying new things.
Like you could have the best voice in the world. But if you don't put in the work to develop your interviewing skills and, you know, your research skills, like you're not going to reach your full potential.
It's like with athletes or musicians.
Right.
Like some people are just naturally gifted.
Yeah.
But to become like a Serena Williams or a Yo-Yo Ma, it takes hours and hours of dedicated practice.
Totally. It's like that 10,000 hours thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, Veronica, she jumps in with this really interesting metaphor.
Okay.
She describes nature as the seed and nurture as the soil.
Okay.
And I really like this because it brings in the environment, you know?
Right.
Like those external factors that influence our growth.
Like different plants need different kinds of soil.
Exactly.
Yep.
Like some seeds need a lot of sun. Others need more shade.
Makes sense.
So in the same way, different people might thrive in different environments.
Oh, interesting.
Like some people might do really well in a structured environment, you know, with clear rules and expectations. While others might excel in a more free-flowing setting where they have more autonomy.
Makes sense.
So it's not about denying that people are born different, you know, with different strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we all need different things to help us grow.
Yeah, like finding the right soil for your seed.
Exactly. And Isaac, he brings up this really good point.
Okay.
He's observed that a lot of naturally gifted people, they hit these plateaus because they don't put in the work.
Oh, I see.
They think that their talent is enough.
Yeah.
But without effort, it's like a seed without nourishment.
It's not going to flourish.
Exactly. It might sprout.
Right.
But it's not going to reach its full potential.
It needs that nurturing environment.
Totally. So we've got these different perspectives kind of coming together, right?
Yeah.
And the discussion then shifts to the importance of like honestly assessing ourselves, like looking at both our strengths and our weaknesses, but not to like label ourselves as good or bad at things. It's more about figuring out our starting point, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, where are we starting from?
Yeah.
What are we naturally good at? And where do we have room for improvement?
So it's about self-awareness.
Yeah, totally.
Like knowing your strengths so you can really use them. And knowing your weaknesses so you can work on them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people get caught up in this idea of like, oh, I'm bad at math, or I'm not creative, and they just like give up on those areas.
Yeah.
But what if we approached it from a place of like, okay, maybe math doesn't come naturally to me, but what if I put in a little extra effort?
Yeah.
Could I improve?
Exactly. It's about maximizing your potential.
Yeah, not denying reality.
Right.
Like, if you're not naturally gifted at something, you might have to work a little harder. That doesn't mean you can't get good at it.
Yeah. Effort can really make a difference.
Exactly. And to kind of illustrate this idea of effort and how it can help us overcome limitations, Isaac brings up this analogy of climbing a mountain.
Okay.
He says that everyone starts their climb from a different point.
Right.
Some people are closer to the base.
Yeah.
Some people might have a head start.
Makes sense.
But the summit, which represents like our full potential, it's reachable for anyone who is willing to put in the effort.
I like that.
Yeah. It's not about comparing ourselves to others. It's about focusing on our own climb and celebrating each step we take along the way.
It's about the journey, not just the destination.
Totally. And now think about your own life for a second.
Okay.
What mountains are you currently climbing?
That's a good question.
Yeah. You know, we all have goals and aspirations.
Yeah.
And some of them can feel pretty daunting.
Right, like climbing a mountain.
Exactly. But if we break down those big goals into smaller, more manageable steps, it becomes a lot less overwhelming.
So instead of focusing on the whole mountain, you focus on the next step.
Exactly. And each step we take brings us closer to the summit.
And each step is a victory in itself.
Totally. And those small victories, they build momentum.
Right.
They give us the confidence to keep going.
They make the journey more enjoyable too.
Exactly. It's like when you're learning a new language. It can feel really overwhelming at first. Right? Like there's so much to learn, but if you break it down into daily practice sessions, it becomes a lot more manageable.
And you start to see progress.
Exactly. And that progress motivates you to keep going.
It's a positive feedback loop.
Totally. Now, one of the things that they talk about in this discussion that I think is really important is this idea of aligning our goals with our genuine interests.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like when we're pursuing something that we're actually passionate about, the effort feels less like work and more like an exciting adventure.
More fun.
Yeah, totally. And they share this great story about this little girl named Emma and her parents. They were really supportive. They wanted her to like try all these different things. So they signed her up for music lessons and dance classes and chess club, you name it.
Wow.
But nothing really seemed to click for her until one day she found this old camera in her grandmother's attic. And something just like sparked in her.
Oh, wow.
She became fascinated by photography.
Cool.
Like the way she could capture these fleeting moments and turn them into these lasting images. It was like she had found her thing.
She found her passion.
Yeah. And it's so cool because it shows how powerful passion can be.
Right.
Like when you're passionate about something, you're more likely to stick with it.
Even when it gets tough.
Exactly. Even when it's challenging, you're still motivated to keep going.
Because you enjoy it.
Totally. So this brings up a really important question.
Okay.
How do we uncover those hidden passions?
Yeah. How do we find that thing that lights us up?
That's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
So are we ready to dig into those strategies for uncovering hidden passions?
Let's do it. I think this is where it gets really practical, you know?
Yeah, totally.
We've talked about how important it is to align our goals with our passions.
Right.
But how do we even know what those passions are in the first place?
That's a good question.
Like for me personally, this is something I've struggled with.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to that feeling of like, what am I really passionate about?
Right, like what's my thing?
Exactly. So the text actually offers some really cool strategies for this.
Okay.
Like it kind of lays out a roadmap for self-discovery.
I like that.
Yeah. So the 4 main approaches they suggest are trying new activities, revisiting past joys, imagining your ideal life, and seeking feedback from others.
Okay, I like those.
Yeah. So let's start with trying new activities.
Sounds good.
I think this is pretty obvious advice, right? Like, if you want to find something you're passionate about, you got to try new things.
Right.
But I think a lot of us get stuck in routines.
Totally.
You know, we get comfortable with what we know.
Yeah.
And it can be scary to step outside of that comfort zone.
Definitely. So how do we break out of that?
Well, I think it starts with cultivating a mindset of curiosity.
Okay.
Like being open to new experiences.
Well, it's like being willing to try things, even if you think you might not like them.
Exactly. You never know what might surprise you.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, you might think you hate pottery,
Uh-huh.
but then you take a class and you end up loving it.
Right. Or you might discover a new band that becomes your favorite.
Totally. Or you start volunteering at an animal shelter.
Yeah.
And you realize that you have this deep passion for helping animals.
So it's about being open to possibilities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about embracing the unknown.
And not letting fear hold you back.
Totally.
Yeah.
Now, the second strategy they talk about is revisiting past joys.
Okay. I like this one.
Yeah, this one is really cool.
Yeah.
Because it's all about tapping into that childlike sense of wonder and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Right.
Think back to your childhood.
Uh-huh.
What activities did you lose yourself in?
Yeah.
What made time melt away?
Mm.
Maybe you were obsessed with building Lego structures.
Okay.
Or writing stories, or drawing,
Yeah.
or playing in the dirt.
Right?
Those early interests often hold clues to our present-day passions.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like maybe the kid who loved building with Legos grows up to be an architect.
Makes sense.
Or the kid who loved writing stories becomes a novelist.
Right.
Or the kid who loved playing in the dirt becomes a gardener.
So it's about looking back to see what brought us joy as kids.
Exactly. And then seeing how those interests might manifest in our adult lives.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a really cool exercise.
Mm.
Now, the third strategy they talk about is imagining your ideal life.
Okay, this sounds a little bit woo-woo.
I know, right?
But I'm curious.
Yeah, so it's basically about creating a vivid mental picture of your ideal day, your ideal week, your ideal year.
Okay.
Like engaging all your senses.
Right.
What are you doing?
Yeah. Who are you with?
Mm.
What does it feel like?
Hmm.
And this might sound kind of silly,
Yeah.
but there's actually a lot of research that shows how powerful visualization can be.
Really?
Yeah, like athletes use visualization all the time.
Oh, right.
To improve their performance.
To like mentally rehearse.
Exactly. And it's not just about athletes, like anyone can benefit from this.
So how does this help us uncover our passions?
Well, when you imagine your ideal life,
Yeah.
you're essentially clarifying your values and aspirations.
Sure.
Like what's really important to you.
Right.
What kind of impact do you want to make on the world? And once you have that clarity, it becomes a lot easier to make choices that align with your vision.
So it's like creating a roadmap for your life.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
you're setting your internal GPS.
I like that.
Yeah. And the cool thing is that as you focus on those images and those feelings,
Yeah.
you actually start to attract opportunities and experiences that align with your vision.
Wow. So it's like you're manifesting your ideal life.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about setting your intentions and then taking action to make them a reality.
That's powerful stuff.
It is. And finally, the last strategy they talk about is seeking feedback from others.
Okay.
Now, this one might seem a little counterintuitive
Yeah.
because we're talking about uncovering our own passions.
Right.
But sometimes the people closest to us can see our strengths and passions more clearly than we can ourselves.
That's true.
Like, they might notice patterns in our behavior or skills that we take for granted.
Yeah. Or interests that we haven't fully explored.
Exactly. So it's about being open to hearing what they have to say.
Even if it's not what we want to hear.
Even if it challenges our assumptions about ourselves.
Right. Because sometimes we have blind spots.
Totally. Like
Yeah.
we might be really good at something, but we don't even realize it because it comes so naturally to us.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So it's about being open to feedback.
Yeah. And being willing to see ourselves through other people's eyes.
Exactly. And remember, all of these strategies are just tools. There's no right or wrong way to use them.
Right.
It's about finding what works best for you.
And being open to experimenting.
Totally. Like,
Oh.
you might try one strategy and it doesn't really resonate with you.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Just try a different one.
Exactly. It's all about exploration.
And self-discovery.
Exactly. And one last thing I want to emphasize is that this process of uncovering your passions is not a one-time event.
Okay.
It's an ongoing journey.
Right.
Like your passions might evolve over time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's about staying curious,
Mm-hmm.
staying open to new experiences,
Yeah.
and allowing yourself to grow and change.
It's about embracing the journey.
Totally. Now, as we move forward in this discussion of nature versus nurture, we're going to start delving into some of the more practical implications.
Like, how do we actually apply these ideas to our lives?
Exactly. Like, we've talked about the importance of aligning our actions with our values.
Right.
But how do we actually do that?
Yeah, that's the big question.
And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
So where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this whole nature versus nurture thing, it's not about picking a side, you know?
Right. It's not like one is right and the other is wrong.
Exactly. It's more about recognizing the complex interplay between our genes and our experiences.
Yeah, like they both contribute to who we are.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think the really cool thing about this discussion is that it highlights the power we have to shape our own lives.
Right, like we're not just passive bystanders.
Exactly. We have agency. We can choose how we respond to our circumstances.
Yeah, we can choose how we want to grow and develop.
Totally. So we've talked about identifying our core values and aligning our actions with those values. And we've even talked about this crazy idea of like self-directed neuroplasticity.
Yeah, like rewiring our brains.
Exactly. But I think for a lot of people, this can feel kind of abstract.
Yeah, like how do we actually put these ideas into practice?
Exactly. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think the key is to start small.
Okay.
Like don't try to change everything overnight.
Right.
Just pick one small thing you want to work on.
Okay. I like that.
And then focus on taking consistent action.
So it's like that whole mountain climbing analogy again.
Exactly. It's about taking one step at a time.
And trusting that those small steps will eventually lead you to the summit.
Right. And each step you take, it builds momentum.
It's like you're creating a positive feedback loop.
Totally. And as you start to see progress, it reinforces your belief in yourself.
And that makes you even more motivated to keep going.
Exactly. So think about those strategies for uncovering your passions.
Okay.
Like trying new activities, revisiting past joys, imagining your ideal life, seeking feedback from others.
Right.
The key is to approach this with a sense of curiosity and playfulness.
Like it's an adventure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, there's no right or wrong way to do this.
Okay.
What works for one person might not work for another. So it's about finding what feels authentic and true for you.
I like that. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is that self-compassion is so important throughout this process.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it's okay to make mistakes.
Right.
It's okay to stumble along the way.
It's all part of the journey.
Exactly. And instead of beating ourselves up, we can choose to treat ourselves with kindness and understanding.
Like we would treat a good friend.
Exactly. And that makes a huge difference.
Yes, totally. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Right.
Like we're all on this journey together.
And we can support each other along the way.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into nature versus nurture, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
You have the power to create the life you want.
I love that.
It's not always easy, but it's definitely possible.
So true. And I think this discussion has given us some really valuable tools to help us on that journey.
Totally. So go out there and explore your potential.
Embrace the unknown.
And never stop learning and growing.
That's what it's all about. So thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into nature versus nurture. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.